friends, my name is Tariq Faraz and you are watching Faraz Urdulish. Today we'll be talking about how to make a CV. So our talk will be divided into four parts. In the first part, we'll be talking about the definition, division and the differences between CV, resume and biodata. In the second part of today's talk, we'll be talking about the formal structure of CV. In the third part, we'll be talking about the types of CVs and the types of resumes. In the fourth part, we'll be talking about the things that we have to avoid while making a CV. So before jumping into the first part, we'll be talking about the CV in general. CV, people say that is a sales brochure which has the salient unique features of people, or the people who are in professions, or the people who aspire to go in any profession. So the word CV stands for curriculum vitae, and this expression is Latin in origin, which means course of one's life and history of one's life, or sometimes long academic details of somebody. So usually people when they use these words CV, resume and biodata, usually in general they do not make any distinction between these words, but sometimes when we have to be very specific about these terms, we have to understand that there are slight differences. As we discussed in the beginning, that the word CV stands for curriculum vitae, and the meaning of this expression is the career of one's life, or history of one's life, or course of one's life. Usually people say that CV is used by the Britishers, and therefore more often it is used there. And as far as resume is concerned, resume is supposed to be a French expression, and it means summary of one's life, or maybe only summary of somebody's academic records. People also make a distinction that a CV is used for a person who has some experience of working, and resume is used for somebody who is just a fresher. As we reach to a conclusion that a resume is for a fresher, a person or a candidate who has no experience, and a CV is a word, or is a term which is used, or which is generally used for a person or for a professional who has experience in some fields. Mostly people get confused between these two expressions, resume and resume. So the word resume, as I mentioned earlier, is French in origin, and the word resume means something else. Resume means to restart from somewhere you last time ended, or you restart from somewhere, or from some place you stopped last time. So there is a difference between these two terms. People often get confused. The third expression that I mentioned in the beginning, that was biodata. People say, experts say and professors say that biodata or biodata is an Indian coinage, and it is used for matrimonial purposes, or for some non-technical and non-academic work. So in biodata or biodata, we have some personal details of the person, like if it is for matrimonial purposes, you have to mention the skin complexion, and then the height of the person, and then the weight of the person, and then the family details of the person, and the highest degree, or the record of your career, or your job informations, and your siblings, and your brief background. Sometimes we also see that people use these words resume, CV and biodata interchangeably, and they do not make any distinction between these three terms. Nowadays there is another word which is used more often, and that is profile. So profile is also sometimes supposed to be an equivalence of CV and resume and biodata, and we see that profile is more often a virtual detail of somebody's career. So profile is something that we have like Facebook profile and LinkedIn profile, and the other you see social media platforms where you make your you give your details, you mention your details, and you project yourself. When resume is written, we see that the word resume, when we pronounce it resume, it has two e's, two small e's, and every e has a diacritic or a mark upon it or above it. So this mark is called diacritic in English, or sometimes acute accent. And that is why we make a distinction between resume and resume. So CV and resume appear to be a formal and professional document of a candidate who is supposed to have some position, or who is in search of some position, or in search of some job. So coming to the second part, as we proposed in the beginning of this video, that we'll be talking about the structure of the CV, and then the types of the CV, and then the things that we have to avoid. So the CV has a couple of headings where you have to mention the details, certain details. In the first part, you have to mention the personal detail, where you write your name, your current position, and then your email address, and then your contact, your phone number. If you have your website or some web pages, professional web pages, you have to mention that. The second heading of the CV is all about the career objectives. So this part of a CV is the most important part of a CV. This part is supposed to be the paramount part, because it talks about your career objectives. It talks about your unique selling and silent features. It talks about it appears to be your sales brochure. I've been teaching in the institutions of higher education almost for a decade, and I've taught students coming from science, technology, and humanities background. I used to pose these questions. I used to pose these questions such as, what are your career objectives? Why are you here in the university? You know that millions of the people outside the university only dream for this place. So the experience of asking questions and getting their answers was very saddening. There would have been hardly a couple of students who could have told certain goals and aims in their life that they wanted to target and they wanted to achieve. So when the common candidate tries to make a CV, what he does, he just goes to the cyber cafe. Cyber cafe person has a career objective, a ready-made career objective, and he just copies and pastes it in your CV, and your CV is prepared. And most of the experts and the professionals, they suggest that you have to understand the career objective very carefully, and you have to remember it by heart. When a candidate goes for an interview and the CV is read, there are chances that people may ask, what are your career objectives? And most of the times what happens, candidates do not remember and do not understand what they have written. So this part, career objective part of your CV, is paramount. So the third part is all about your educational and academic details, where you have to mention the details in the descending order. So in the next heading, you have to make a heading work experience, if you have, which is optional. If you have any past experience working in any organization or any industry, you have to mention that, and you have to give proper references, and you have to mention the duration of that service. The next heading is the activities and the achievements that you have in your life. You have to give brief details about that. The next one is the details of membership. It is also optional. If you have membership of any organization, membership of any society, membership of any club, or membership of any sort, so you have to mention that in that section. The next heading of your CV is the skills that you acquire, or the skills that you have. You have to mention very carefully about the skills, sometimes like technical skills, language skills, and the other skills which you have. Last but not the least, that is reference part of your CV. So reference part has has to be written very carefully. What is that? Reference part is a part which has the details of your seniors, or the details of your heads, under which or under whose supervision you have already worked. Sometimes people also give references of the professors and the colleagues in their CVs. Suppose sometimes you submit your CV, you send your CV, and the employer needs some recommendation, or maybe sometimes the employer wishes to cross check the details, and he wishes to cross examine your details and cross-examine you as a person. So we recommend that before mentioning the names of the people in the reference section, you call those people and take them in confidence and ask them for their goodwill, or maybe sometimes you let them know that you are writing or you are mentioning their names in the reference section, so that if somebody is calling and asking and inquiring about yourself, they have some good words about you. Now we will be moving from second part to the third part of our talk today, and that was the types of CV or the types of resume. So we'll be talking about the types of CV. So the first type or the first kind that we have, it is called chronological CV. Now what is chronological CV? Chronological CV is a CV which has a long and detailed information about your previous jobs or the jobs that you are doing in a very sequential order. Okay, so it discusses about the entire course of your career or the entire history of your career. So the second one is the functional CV. Functional CV is a CV which is skill based, in which you have to mention your skills that you have for the position that you are targeting. So in this CV or in this kind in this type of CV, you do not mention the entire history or the entire course or the entire detail of your previous and the current career. There is a third category of CV that is called hybrid or combined CV. So what is combined and hybrid CV? A combined and a hybrid CV is a CV which is a mixture of chronological and functional CV. It is a mixture. It is a mixture of both these kinds. Now this is the division that generally people make in terms of writing and making a CV. Now there are some other terminologies people distinguish. People use especially in USA where people use the word resume. So there they categorize resume into two different parts. So it appears that they have two different types of resumes there. The first one is ASCII resume and the second one is HTML resume. So ASCII stands for American Standard Code for Information Interchange. It works with the help of the software called OCR. OCR stands for Optical Character Recognizer or Recognition. So this is a software which tracks out the resumes on internet or on web pages, or sometimes when we feed it in the software. Now the second type that we called HTML resume. HTML resume is a resume which has hypertext markup language. So in that case, what you have to do, you have to create an HTML and you have to copy paste your entire resume there. Sometimes it is in some software and sometimes it is on some web pages. So you have to do that. So experts say that there are thousands of benefits of having an HTML resume. One of them is that the very time you paste and copy your resume or feed the information in the format, at the very time more than crores or maybe the entire globe can have access to your resume or the details that you have given. So this is one of the things. So this is one of the biggest benefits that people have when they make HTML resumes. So the other benefit is that you can reach to people very quickly. People from outside, people from the other side, they can reach you very quickly. Not only this, you can also update and replace and restructure your CV. And so in HTML resumes, you have other facilities such as you can paste your photo, you can make your infographics, you can make videos, you can make impressive profiles, so many things. So this is all for the third part. Coming to the fourth part, in which we proposed in the beginning of the video that there are things that we have to avoid while making a CV. So we'll be talking about this. So the first thing that we have to do about making a CV is that we have to be very, very careful about typos. Now, what is typos? Typos is a typing mistake. What happens when you send a CV to a person? Your CV is never read, your CV is only seen. So within a couple of seconds it is decided whether the person should call you or not. So you have to be very careful about the typos. So the second biggest mistake people commit is inappropriate email. When you make your Gmail account or any email account, you have to be very careful about those words that you have in the email. Sometimes what happens, people make an email and they mention a word like ladylover@gmail.com. So you have to be very careful about these words. You may write your name, you may mention your name, you may mention your nickname, or you may mention the name of the place you belong to. You can do anything. You can use your pet name. You can use your mother's name. You can use your father's name, or you can mix them. So you have to be very careful about the email addresses. When somebody sends a CV somewhere, so people also they may not read your CV, but they see your CV, and the time they see your CV, they realize that it has bad formatting. You see that candidates, in terms of making their CV long and detailed, they insert irrelevant information that you have to avoid when you are making your CV. If you are a fresher or you don't have any experience, you have to put the most important information at the top, not at the bottom. Sometimes what happens, the employer may ask to write something about yourself, or sometimes he may ask about job application. So you have to be very careful about the language that you use. The language that you use at that time should be politically correct and modest and polite. So you should avoid negative language. The other thing is that when people prepare their CV, and usually they prepare the CV in the Microsoft Word format. So after making and preparing your CV, you have to convert that file into PDF file. Now what happens when you see when you send the Word file by your email, the fonts and the structures they get disturbed at the other end when that is downloaded. So if you convert that Word file into PDF, it will not affect the formatting structure. Throughout the years, I have been suggesting to my students and my fellow scholars and fellow candidates that you have to be very careful about the informations that you provide in the CV, and you never lie when you are making your CV. You never ever lie when you are making a CV. Now what happens, most of the times people, in terms of impressing the other or the employer, they use jargons, some big words, some difficult words, difficult to pronounce and difficult to read and difficult to understand. You have to avoid them. You have to use the words which are very simple and commonly understood. Sometimes it is also suggested that you don't have to send your photo until or unless somebody is asking for the same, and you have to avoid letting them know the date of birth. If you are not asked, you don't have to mention the marital status. Experts and CEOs also suggest and recommend that you never ever send a CV naked. What do we mean by a naked CV? A naked CV is a CV which does not have an application or a letter. We also call this application or this letter as job application letter. So whenever we have to send a CV somewhere, we have to make we have to make a letter. We have to make a job application letter. So sometimes what happens, people make a common job application letter and they send the same letter to each and every position they apply for. This is the mistake that people do. You have to be very careful. You have to research before sending an application, and you have to give some input. You have to understand the nature of the work, and according to the nature of the work, you have to structure and restructure your letter. So the job application letter should be different for different positions. It should not be the same all the times. Now in this way we come to realize how important our CV is and how important our resume is in today's and modern world. If we are really interested and if we are really seeking some place or some position somewhere in some organization in some industry, if you want to be seen as a serious person, you have to prepare your CV very carefully. I've been telling people for almost a decade that we are living in an age of cutthroat competition. So competition is rife today. Apart from that, since we mentioned that CV is your you see sales brochure, you have to sell your skills that you have. You have to sell yourself in terms of you see getting some position or some job. You have to understand these skills, how to sell the sales brochure of your skills. So you have to be very careful in terms of selling your skills so that you could achieve you could get a good job. So today in this video we discussed about CV, we discussed about resume, we discussed about biodata. We distinguished that CV and resume are different in some ways. In a very nutshell, if we conclude, we get to know that resume is French in origin, and resume stands for summary of one's career. CV stands for curriculum vitae, which means course of one's life, career of one's life, or history of one's life, and history of one's career. And biodata, which we discussed, that is an Indian coinage. It is used for non-academic and non-technical jobs and positions today, and more often we give examples such as labor class and matrimonial purposes, where we have to give specific information. We also discussed another word that we have been using nowadays, that is profile. So profile can be used for either of these words, and it is more often virtual. It is used in virtual spaces such as LinkedIn, Facebook, platforms which are used for social and academic and non-academic and technical purposes. What I wish you to remember is that you have to be very careful about the career objectives in terms of composing it, in terms of remembering it, in terms of articulating it. So these were the important things that I wanted to share with you. As we mentioned that we are never supposed to send a CV naked. We explained that CV must have an application letter or a job application letter. So in the next video, we'll be talking about a job application letter and its structure. So thank you for watching Faraz Urdulish. This is all for today's class. See you in the next video. Until then, please take care of yourself. Thank you.